The water is black, and it is not moving, and neither is he. The regulator is in his mouth, and air is coming through, but not enough, never enough, because his chest cannot expand against the rock, and every breath costs more than the one before, and his gauge is spinning past the red, and the legs of the man in front of him are still kicking, still churning the silt off the floor into a cloud that has swallowed everything. The walls, the ceiling, his hands in front of his face, all of it gone, replaced by the absolute dark that lives at the bottom of the earth where no light has ever reached. And he cannot move forward, and he cannot move back, and his name is Marcus Webb, and he is going to have to make a decision that no training prepares you for, and no God forgives you for, and no amount of time ever fully buries. You are watching The Human Limit. I am your host. If you have the stomach for survival stories that do not clean themselves up before the end, this channel is exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe. Hit the like button. It costs you nothing. Now let me tell you what happened inside the cave. Cave diving exists at the intersection of two of the most dangerous activities a human being can voluntarily undertake. Open water diving has its own catalog of ways to die. Nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, decompression sickness, equipment failure, disorientation, depth. But cave diving adds something open water cannot replicate. It adds the ceiling. The absolute geological fact that above you, in every direction, there is rock, and the surface is not accessible, and if something goes wrong, you cannot simply ascend. You cannot point your body upward and let physics solve the problem. You are inside the earth, inside a flooded passage that was not designed with your survival in mind, and the only way out is the way you came in. And sometimes the way you came in is no longer available to you. The statistics are not ambiguous. Cave diving kills experienced divers at a rate that should deter almost everyone who reads them. Most fatalities involve people who had significant open water experience. They were not beginners. They were people who understood water, who had logged hundreds of hours underwater, who knew how to manage equipment and read gauges and stay calm under pressure. And the cave killed them anyway. Because the cave does not care about your certification. It does not care about your experience or the quality of your gear or the depth of your love for the people waiting on the surface. It is rock and water and darkness, and it has been those things for millions of years, and you are a temporary visitor with a finite supply of air and no natural right to be there. Marcus Webb knew all of this. He had been diving caves for 11 years when it happened. His two partners that day, Joel Ferris and Daniel Caro, were equally experienced. These were not thrill seekers. They were technical divers with certifications representing thousands of hours of study and practice. They had planned this dive with the methodical attention experienced cave divers bring to every entry, checking redundancies, marking their line, calculating gas consumption against planned penetration depth, building in every margin that is supposed to keep you alive when something goes wrong. The cave they entered was located in a region of karst topography where limestone bedrock has been dissolving for so long that the ground beneath is riddled with passages and chambers and connections that no complete map has ever captured. The entrance was known. The first several hundred meters had been dived before, documented, familiar. The passages beyond that documented section were not known. That was exactly why they were there. They were carrying survey equipment along with their dive gear, pushing the boundary of the explored section further into the rock, moving toward the place on the map where information runs out and blankness begins. There is a pull to that frontier that is almost impossible to explain to someone who has never felt it. Cave divers feel it at the end of the laid line, at the point where the marked passage becomes unmarked rock, and everything ahead is genuinely unseen by any human being who has ever lived. Marcus Webb wrote about it in the notes he kept after the incident, notes he described as his attempt to put the experience somewhere outside himself, because carrying it entirely inside was no longer sustainable. He wrote, "There is a quality of silence in an unexplored cave passage that does not exist anywhere else. Every cave that has been dived before carries the residue of the people who have been in it. Their bubbles left mineral deposits. Their fins disturbed sediment that settled into new patterns. But an unexplored passage has never held a human sound." When you enter it and your regulator releases its first exhale and the bubbles rise and strike the ceiling, you are the first. That sound has never happened in that place before, and the silence that receives it is ancient and indifferent and does not welcome you. It simply continues, as if your presence is an interruption too brief to acknowledge. They had been in the water for approximately 90 minutes when they pushed past the documented section and entered the unexplored passage. The water temperature had dropped as they went deeper into the system, cold enough to begin extracting heat from an unprotected body at a meaningful rate, cold enough to slow fine motor control if you stayed in it long enough. The passage they were following narrowed and widened, dropped and rose, rotating through angles that made no intuitive sense because they were formed by water moving through soluble rock over geological time, following chemical gradients and fracture lines, producing a three-dimensional labyrinth that a human body can navigate in some places and cannot navigate in others, and the line between those two categories is not always visible in advance. Marcus was last in the line. Daniel Caro was leading, pulling the survey reel, laying new guideline into the unexplored section. Joel Ferris was in the middle. Marcus was third, documenting with a camera, checking the line behind them, serving as the rear anchor of the team. He wrote about the moment the passage changed. He wrote about it in present tense even though he was recording it years later, because that is what trauma does to time. It removes the distance between the remembering and the remembered. He wrote, "The passage narrows. I can see Joel's fins in front of me and the cloud his movement is raising from the floor. The silt here is fine, the kind that has been undisturbed so long it has settled into layers thin as paper, and anything moving through it sends it into the water column where it hangs like smoke. I am watching my visibility shrink with every stroke Joel takes. I am thinking we may need to call the dive soon, not because of gas, but because of visibility. Because once the silt rises completely, you are navigating by touch and by line, and by the suppression of every instinct that says turn around, go back, get out." Daniel is the first one through the restriction. I know this because the movement of Joel's fins changes. They are no longer the long, slow strokes of a diver in open water. They are short and jerking, and then they stop, and then they start again in a different rhythm. And I understand before I can see anything that Joel has reached a restriction and is negotiating it, working his body through some narrowing that requires technique and stillness and the controlled management of buoyancy that cave divers practice until it is reflex. I do not yet understand what kind of restriction it is. The restriction that trapped Joel Ferris was what cave divers call a keyhole, a passage whose cross-section is not circular or oval, but irregular, where the rock has broken and shifted in ways that create a shape admitting certain configurations of a human body, and rejecting others with a precision that seems almost deliberate. Keyhole restrictions are among the most dangerous features in a cave system, because they can allow entry and deny exit. A diver can find the angle that passes them in one direction and be completely unable to find the angle in reverse. Joel entered head first, following Daniel's line. He was through to his shoulders before the restriction revealed itself. His tanks caught on the upper edge of the narrowing at precisely the angle that made forward movement impossible and rearward extraction a problem his hands could not solve. He could feel the rock on both sides of him, above and below him. The specific pressure of limestone that has not shifted in 10,000 years and will not shift because a man is pressing against it. He could feel he was wedged and that pushing harder would not help, and that he needed to exhale and could not fully exhale because there was no space for his chest to contract into. Marcus Webb was watching the fins. He wrote, "They stop and start and stop again, and I am close enough now to put my hand on Joel's ankle, and I do. I wrap my hand around it because it is the only communication available, the only open channel between our bodies and the dark. And through my hand I feel the quality of his movement change. It is no longer the controlled movement of a diver working a restriction. It is something else. The movement of a body using its muscles in ways that training does not prescribe. The movement of effort without technique. And I know what that means. I have never felt it before, but I know what it means in the way you know certain things without having learned them, because the body understands before the mind finishes forming the thought. He is stuck. The word is so small. He is stuck, and we are more than 2 kilometers from the entrance, and the silt is in the water. And my gauge says we have burned more gas than I calculated, and his gauge, which I cannot read, but can estimate from our shared consumption rate, says the same. And the restriction that has him is above me, and I cannot pass him, and I cannot go back because he is between me and the line is the only way home. Here is what 45 minutes of air feels like in a cave. It does not feel like 45 minutes anywhere else. Every breath is an accounting event. Every exhale is subtraction. You feel the gas column in your tanks the way you feel a backpack lightening mile by mile. And in a cave, that sensation is not gradual and abstract, but immediate and concrete, and attached to a number on a gauge you check compulsively, every 30 seconds. Because the checking is the only thing that resembles control. Marcus Webb was at the bottom of the restriction tunnel with Joel Ferris's legs in his face, a silk cloud closing the world to a radius of 18 inches and approximately 40 minutes of breathable gas remaining in his tanks. He tried everything training had taught him. He tried talking Joel through position changes by squeezing his ankles in patterns they had agreed on before the dive. 3 squeezes to back up, 2 to adjust position, 1 to stop. Joel felt the signals. Joel tried to respond. For approximately 10 minutes, they worked through every combination of adjustment the restriction allowed, every angle Joel could achieve with his hips and shoulders in the available space, every reconfiguration of his body and equipment that might change the geometry enough to let the rock release him. The rock did not release him. Marcus wrote, "I try to get above him. There is a shelf of rock to my left that might give me a position to push from a different angle, and I get onto it and I push, and Joel moves forward maybe 3 centimeters, maybe 5, and then the rock gives nothing else. I push until my arms are shaking. I push until the effort drives my breathing rate up to where I can feel the gas going fast, faster than the gauge can track in real time, and I know that I am spending minutes of air on centimeters of movement that are not sufficient, and will not be sufficient because the problem is not force. The problem is geometry. The shape of Joel's body, and the shape of his equipment, and the shape of this particular piece of limestone do not permit the configuration required for forward movement, and no force applied from behind changes the geometry. The rock is not going to reshape itself. Joel is not going to reshape himself. The only remaining variable is me. 30 minutes of air. He wrote, "I count my breaths. 4 counts in, 4 out. In the space between the counting and the breathing, I try to think with the part of my mind that is not on fire with understanding what is happening. The part that can still do arithmetic, that can still hold 2 facts in relation to each other and derive a third. Fact 1, Joel is not coming free. Fact 2, neither of us has enough air to wait here for a rescue that is not coming. Fact 3 follows from 1 and 2 the way a conclusion follows from its premises, requiring no emotional engagement to produce, cold and exact and waiting for me at the end of the logical sequence like a room I cannot avoid entering." He does not write that fact, not in those terms. He writes around it, describes physical details of the next several minutes, what he assessed, what he checked, what he observed, and anyone reading it can see the fact taking shape in the negative space between those details. See him approaching it the way you approach a wound you need to examine, with the deliberate steadiness that is not the absence of fear, but the management of it. 22 minutes of air. He wrote, "Joel has stopped moving, not stopped trying, stopped moving. His body is still in the restriction, and the stillness is worse than the struggling was, because the struggling meant effort, and effort meant time, and the stillness means he has arrived at the same calculation I have arrived at. I do not know what he is thinking, but I know what he is feeling, because I can feel it through the water between us, through the stone that connects us, through the absolute dark that surrounds us both equally. He is looking forward into a passage that may or may not open beyond the restriction. He does not know if Daniel made it to a chamber, to a pocket of trapped air. He cannot communicate that question, and I cannot answer it, and between us, we have 22 minutes of gas in my tanks, and whatever remains in his, which I cannot access and cannot calculate precisely, but which started lower than mine because he has been working harder and breathing faster, and is smaller and has been consuming at a rate that puts him, I believe, close to empty. He wrote, I look at his regulator, I look at the hose, I look at the valve, and I do not write what I think. Writing it would require making it exist outside myself in a way I am not yet ready for. The 30 seconds I spend not writing it are the last 30 seconds in which the decision is theoretical, in which it exists only as a logical construction and not as an action I am about to take. 15 minutes of air. He wrote, there is a thing that no training prepares you for, and that no certification course addresses, and that survival psychology literature only touches from outside, from the clinical distance of someone who was not in the cave. That thing is the specific quality of the moment when you understand that the abstract calculus of survival has become a concrete physical task with steps. There are steps. He knew the steps. Not because he had rehearsed this particular sequence, but because he knew his equipment with the completeness that technical divers achieve through thousands of hours of practice. When he understood what the steps were, they assembled themselves in his mind with a clarity he describes as the most disturbing mental experience of his life. More disturbing than the fear, more disturbing than the cold or the dark, because it was not disordered or chaotic, it was clear. It was ordered. The kind of lucid, procedural understanding the mind produces when it has fully accepted a situation and is organizing itself to act. He wrote, water temperature is 9 degrees. My fingers are responding, but slowly. The silt has settled slightly. Visibility may be 2 feet, maybe less. Joel's regulator is on his right side, second stage, attached to the primary first stage on his right tank. Accessing it requires me to move to his right side, which requires repositioning in a space that does not offer comfortable repositioning, which requires solving a physical problem before I can begin the sequence. I spend approximately 90 seconds solving the physical problem. I do not think about what I am solving it for. I think about the geometry of the space and the position of my body and the sequence of movements required. This is how the mind handles actions it cannot fully permit itself to contemplate. It focuses on the immediate physical detail and allows the larger purpose to remain in peripheral vision, acknowledged but not confronted directly. I get into position. He wrote, the valve is there. The second stage is there. My hand is on it. And for the next 4 minutes, as accurately as I can reconstruct the time, I do not move. I am in contact with the equipment, and I am in contact with Joel, and I can feel through my hand on his regulator the movement of his breathing, the rhythm of it, the pace of it, the specific quality of the inhale and exhale of a man who is afraid and cold, and running out of air, and waiting, I believe, with a knowledge of what is going to happen. I do not know if he arrived at it before I did, or after, or at the same moment. 11 minutes of air. He wrote, I do not say goodbye, because I have no way to say it, and because saying it would change what I am about to do into something that requires a quality of formal recognition I cannot sustain in this space, in this cold, with 11 minutes between me and the same outcome I am about to determine for him. What I do instead is put my other hand on his ankle. I hold it for a duration I cannot measure that felt both very short and very long, and then I begin. The sequence he describes in the pages that follow is clinical. He writes it in the same tone a mechanic might use to describe the steps of an engine repair. This is not callousness. It is dissociation in service of completion, the mind operating at practical remove because the only way to continue is to not be fully present in the meaning of each step while executing it. He writes about valves and pressures and physical resistance and available space to move through. He writes about equipment weight and required angles and managing his buoyancy as the configuration of bodies in the passage shifted. He writes about the resistance of the rock and the direction of the line, and the way darkness was absolute and complete and identical in all directions. He does not write about Joel Ferris's face. He cannot see it. He never sees it again. He wrote, I am through the restriction. I do not know exactly how long it took. My gauge reads 8 minutes. The passage beyond the restriction opens immediately into a chamber with a ceiling high enough that my bubbles do not reach it before dissipating, which means there may be an air pocket at the top, which means Daniel Caro, if he reached this chamber, may have had options Joel and I never had. This thought arrives in my mind like a stone dropped into still water, and I feel the rings of it moving through every part of me. And I do not stop moving because stopping means using air I do not have and thinking thoughts I cannot yet survive. Daniel Caro was in the chamber. He had found the air pocket. He had been in it for 31 minutes, rationing his breath, pressing his face against the ceiling where a pocket of trapped gas offered borrowed time. He was alive. He did not know what had happened behind him in the restriction. He did not know until Marcus Webb came through the passage and surfaced in the pocket, and they looked at each other in the thin beam of the remaining dive light, and the accounting of who was present was conducted in the silence between two men who had been in the dark long enough to know that silence can contain more information than speech. They made it out. The return passage was navigated on minimal gas, on the reserve margins built into every cave dive as the final accounting of whether the plan was sufficient. They surfaced. The sun was there. The trees were there. The ordinary daylight that a person emerging from underground experiences as something almost violent in its normalcy, its cheerful indifference to what happened below. Marcus Webb sat on the bank for a long time. He does not describe what he thought. He describes what he saw, the water's surface, the cave entrance, the equipment he was still wearing, his hands, the gauge on his tank reading empty, the sky. The investigation that followed concluded consistently with Marcus Webb's account. Joel Ferris had become fatally entrapped in a keyhole restriction at a penetration depth that made rescue impossible given the available gas supply. No decision any of the three divers made was negligent or reckless by the standards of the discipline they were practicing. They planned according to accepted methodology. They carried the prescribed equipment. They encountered a hazard the methodology cannot fully protect against, because the hazard was geological and specific and unknown and unforeseeable. Marcus Webb read that report many times in the years that followed, in the way people return to documents they feel should resolve something, hoping they will eventually produce a resolution that has not yet come. The report told him what happened. It told him nothing he did could have prevented it. It told him, in the bloodless language of technical investigation, that he did what the situation required. It did not tell him how to sleep. He wrote, "There is a version of this story I have told myself many times. In this version, the story is about survival and the mathematics of irreversible situations, and the clarity extreme circumstances can produce in a human mind. In this version, the decision I made is characterized as the only decision available, which is accurate, and therefore not really a decision at all, which is not accurate. Not from the inside. From the inside, a decision that is the only option available is still a decision. Your hands still move. The sequence still has steps. Your body still executes the task, and when it is over, you are still the person whose hands moved, and whose body executed, and whose mind, clear and ordered and functioning with a precision that felt almost inhuman in the moment, assembled the sequence and initiated it, and carried it through to completion. The mathematics do not reach back in time and move your hands for you. You move them. That is the part the report does not address. That is the part nothing addresses. Not fully, not in a way that settles. He went back to cave diving. Not immediately, not for a long time. But eventually he returned, because the alternative was to let the cave have the last word, to let what happened in the dark define the limits of what was possible above the surface in the light. He decided, somewhere in the long, difficult years between the incident and his first re-entry into a flooded passage, that he was not willing to grant the cave that authority over his life. He dives with a partner. He checks the gas. He checks restrictions in advance with tools designed for assessing passage dimensions, with a rigor his partners describe as exceeding anything they have encountered in another diver. He lays his line and reads his gauge, and marks his turns, and does every single thing training prescribes and experience reinforces. And when he is deep in a system, in the unexplored section, in the silence that has never held a human sound, he moves through it with the specific quality of attention that belongs to a person who knows, Not abstractly, but viscerally. Not theoretically, but in the cells of his hands and the recorded memory of his muscles, exactly what the darkness can hold. Marcus Webb, when asked what he would want people to take from his account, paused a long time before answering. He said, "I want them to understand that there are situations in which all of the decisions are correct and the outcome is still what it is. I want them to sit with that, not fix it, not resolve it, not extract a protocol or a lesson or a reassurance from it. Just sit with it. Because the people who have been in those situations have to sit with it every day, and the least the rest of the world can do is sit with it for the length of a story. That is the human limit." Thank you for watching. If this story reached you, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, tell me what you would have done in the dark, in the cold, with 8 minutes on the gauge, and the answer already assembled in your hands. I read every comment. I will be back with another story from the place where human beings find out who they are when everything else has been removed. The water is still black. It is still not moving. It has never moved for anything, and that is exactly why we keep going in.